Hi everyone, welcome back to Visually Hidden Selects. I'm Peter O'Brien, and today I'd like to talk to you about Goodfellas from 1990. This film is based on the real-life events of Henry Hill, as documented in the book Wise Guy, written by Nicholas Pileggi, who also co-wrote the screenplay with the director Martin Scorsese. The film stars Ray Liotta, who plays the main character, Henry Hill. He is also the narrator of the film, so they utilized a lot of Henry Hill's actual testimony and interviews with the author Nicholas Pileggi into the script, into the narration, and so Ray Liotta, on his way to filming, he would actually listen to those tapes and those recordings to just kind of get a sense of how the real Henry Hill spoke. The film pretty much rests on his shoulders. I mean, he is the main character, he is the narrator, and his performance is really top-notch. You can't even think about another actor in that role. And part of it is that intensity, and part of it is also his sincerity. And you could see these in his earlier performances, specifically Something Wild and Dominic Eugene. Those are two very different roles, but they come together to make the character of Henry Hill, both in the intensity and in the subtleness of the character. Lorraine Bracco, who plays Karen Hill, also just delivers a very strong performance, and in a film surrounded by heavy hitters in the acting field, she really holds her own. And part of it was Lorraine Bracco's own intention to not wind up on the cutting room floor. She realized that Karen could very easily be dissected out of this particular story and have the focus remain on Henry, but she takes the role of Karen Hill to such a indispensable place. I think one of the things that keeps this film alive and keeps it relevant for viewers today and keeps it entertaining for viewers today is the filmmaking. Martin Scorsese's approach is pretty fantastic and pretty unconventional, especially with this specific film. His previous film was The Last Temptation of Christ, and you could not get further from The Last Temptation of Christ than Goodfellas. The film takes place over the course of 25 years, and that is a big stretch of time to cover in a film, but it does it in only 2 hours and 25 minutes. It moves very swiftly, and the way they do that is through a lot of little short scenes. Most of the film is almost in like a montage format insofar as the editing goes. There's narration filling in the blanks of the story and music carrying the scenes throughout the time periods. And that is a big credit to the editor, Thelma Schoonmaker. She's edited pretty much all of Martin Scorsese's narrative feature films since 1980's Raging Bull. The editing in this film and the pacing and the way it all ties in with the music and the narration and the action on the screen is just phenomenal. But there's only really a handful of sit-down conversational scenes within the film. Of course, there's the famous scene between Ray Liotta and Joe Pesci where he asks, how is he funny? Am I a clown? Am I here to amuse you? And there are some big technical moments in this film as well. One of the more famous shots in this film is, in fact, its own scene. It's a 3-minute shot as the camera follows Henry and Karen through the back door of the Copacabana. The setup that goes into something like that and the performance that goes into that scene should not be overlooked. One thing this movie does as a whole, it kind of showcases the disposable nature of this lifestyle. They will introduce a barrage of different characters who are fleeting within the story, but they make it a point to introduce them. There's one scene specifically where they're moving through a club and Ray Liotta's narration is just introducing all of these characters that you really only see for this one moment. Also, the way in which they just burn through money. It's of little to no object to them whatsoever. Through the characters, through the experiences, and through the lifestyle, you just kind of get a sense of like living for the moment, and people come, people go, and sometimes they don't go voluntarily, as you find out a number of times in this film. And really, the tight-knit trio of Henry, Jimmy, and Tommy, they are probably the closest the characters could possibly get to one another in terms of caring about each other. But again, if any one of them were to fall out of line or fall out of good graces, it wouldn't even be an afterthought, even after 25 years. Because at any given moment, a person can become totally expendable. If they get in the way, if they get out of line, if they mess up. I don't know if I have a favorite scene in this movie so much as a favorite sequence, which comes at the beginning of the third act, and it's the May 11th, 1980 sequence. If you've seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen the film, the character, the story, the film itself is like a runaway train. And the filmmaking really just takes over at this point specifically through the editing, through the narration, through the music, and through what was actually filmed and how it was filmed. It just presents it in such a tangible way that you really get pulled into the film at this particular moment. This film does not have a traditional score. All of the music in this film consists of pre-recorded tracks from throughout the time period in which the film takes place. Every single piece of music was picked by Martin Scorsese to help illustrate the time period, move the story along, and coincide with the action of the film. So much so that there are some pieces of music in this film, if you've watched it, you cannot help but associate with this film as though it is a piece of the score. A prime example of this is Layla by Derek and the Dominos. It's tied in with the action so well that it has almost become a theme for this particular film, an unofficial theme. And so usually with a film, the score is something that will make it timeless because that music is written for that particular story and that particular film. Nothing dates a movie quicker and faster than a piece of popular music. However, in the case of Goodfellas, it's kind of the reverse because this movie wants to be dated to its specific timeline. So in 1955, you're getting songs from 1955 and earlier, and that helps tell the story, and it helps put the audience into the position of the characters in that time period. As it moves through the 1960s into the 1970s, the soundtrack facilitates the storytelling and helps usher in the different time periods. There is so much going on in this particular film. You can watch this movie every night for a week straight and still pick out little things in the background. It's almost overload. Like, it almost demands to be rewatched. One of the things that I love about this film is actually the sequel. The author of the book and co-writer of the script, Nicholas Pileggi, his wife was Nora Ephron. And Nora Ephron was also a writer, and one of the films that she wrote is called My Blue Heaven, which is not actually a sequel, but it's a sequel. While her husband was interviewing Henry Hill and collecting information for his book, she would hear or overhear these conversations and these situations that would come up. And she just started making her own little notes. So if you watch My Blue Heaven in conjunction with Goodfellas, there is an irrefutable through line with that character. From the opening scene of this film, you really get a sense of what you're in for. It just hits the ground running, and it grabs your attention. I was probably about 8 years old the first time I saw this movie, and maybe it's because I'm from New York. It didn't really faze me the way it might faze some other people, but there is a lot of profanity and a lot of violence. But the profanity and the violence in this film is almost used as an art form in and of itself. So that's it for Goodfellas. Again, I highly recommend this film. It is definitely worth rewatching if you have seen it before. And if you do check it out, please leave us a comment, let us know what you think. And we'll be discussing this film at length on the Visually Hidden podcast, so be sure to tune in for that. Until next time, see ya.